much. It's really an honor to be with this group and to share a little bit about some work that I've been doing for the last several years. And it really has to do with games and how we can use games effectively in helping students make that transition to post-secondary education and to be successful upon their arrival. Before I start today, I'd like to acknowledge that I am joining you from Montana, and I want to share that many Indigenous peoples, including those of the Apsáalooke, the Nimiipuu, the Oceti-Sakowin, the Piikani, the Salish, the Shoshone, and the Tsetsahatsetse, have traditional claims to this land upon which I sit here at Montana State University. As a settler, I wish to acknowledge the past and present peoples of this land. Their commitment to place, community, and all relations inform my work. I also want to invite those of you who use Twitter to continue this conversation both in the chat or using Twitter and the hashtag Caucus20. So let's go ahead and get started. It is the beginning of the academic year, and a very odd academic year, let's just be honest. We don't know in many cases what it will look like or what our world and how we're going back to campus looks. But what we do know is that students are excited to be a part and take their journey to the next level. These are posts from students all over the United States, two here in Montana, and they are stoked about beginning their post-secondary journey. They're showing it off in their sweatshirts, they're holding up pennants, there is excitement. And whether you have students who are excited about beginning their post-secondary journey in a face-to-face format or in an online format, they're excited for the next step. And yet, in my context, in the United States, there will be some level of loss, because the reality is that among those who begin post-secondary in the US, 1 out of 4 does not continue for their second year. So just think about that. 25% of students do not return for their second year. That is a colossal loss of ideas, possibilities, potential, talent. And so I'm going to take a moment and ask folks in the chat to share what percentage of students at your institution do not return for their second year if they're pursuing a multi-year credential. So just take a moment and think about, what is your loss on your campus? Please feel free to type it in the chat so that we can see. Are we looking at 20% of students don't return? 5% of students don't return? 10%? And then I'm also going to ask you and invite you, what reasons do students give for not continuing with their post-secondary study? Anyone wish to share? I'm monitoring the chat and not seeing anything. Feel free to answer that question at a time that makes sense for you. So part of the reason, some reason why students may not continue, it could be financial, it could be family obligations, as Erica shared. Sometimes what it comes down to is students don't always know how to do post-secondary education. When they're in high school, they often look to a counselor. And when we have a single counselor working with these 3 students, you know what? Those students are probably getting the information that they need, the resources they need to know what that next step looks like. But in Ontario, a recent study found the student to counselor ratio is 386 to 1. But in 10% of Ontario high schools, it's 826 to 1. So wrap your head around that. There is a single person who is often tasked with helping students be prepared in terms of application and admission and the financial aid, like in Ontario, filing your OSAP, ensuring that those students take the correct coursework in order to be academically prepared. And with 826 to 1, what is that third leg of the stool? Like how to do higher education? What are the norms and the values, the people, the programs, the services? That bit of the stool is completely missing. And so what we're really asking students to do in many ways is to begin drafting their blueprint from an already wobbly stool. And so I've been thinking, you know, I've done a lot of reading and research around that transition from high school to higher education. And in listening and viewing and speaking with students across Canada and the United States, what I've come up to realize is that higher education is a game. Let's face it. How do you do higher ed? And so I'm going to just take a moment in the chat. How do you see how higher education is like a game? I'll give you a couple suggestions while people add things to the chat. Students strategize. Students strategize in terms of their schedule especially. You know these students, they're angling on how to get the ideal sleep schedule. So maybe they stack classes up on Tuesdays and Thursdays so that they have Monday, Wednesday, Friday off. Maybe they want to ensure that they have no classes before 10 a.m. And then within that strategy, they make choices. You know, they start the 10-page paper on Wednesday night when it's due on Thursday morning. That's a choice. And then they get feedback. They get feedback on the consequences of that choice. Like maybe the professor that says, looks like you worked on that last night. There's a lots of risk and rolling of the dice, Sheila shares, working in and outside the rules. And sometimes we call those rules of higher education policies and procedures. They're student codes of conduct. In so many ways, higher education is a game. We have students who have to take like in a game to complete something, absolutely. And that's really the value of game-based learning. And so I want to share with you some things that I observed having watched games change people's thinking. And it starts with actually sitting and watching my own nephews over the holidays, playing games for hours and hours on end. They would say, Aunt Tricia, come check this game out. This is super cool. They were completely immersed. And these were games that quite often invited them to learn something about world history, about world civilizations. And so when we talk about game-based learning, we're going to distinguish game-based learning from gamification for just a moment. So game-based learning, using games as a teaching tool, is also referred to as serious gaming, in which the games are really designed around affecting learning outcomes. And in this case, we might use digital games, computer games, video games. Maybe you've seen people play board games or card games, and they're all with the goal of teaching something around a content. So I'm going to take a moment to just pause and ask you, do you remember using any games when you were in school, maybe in K-12? They've had years of using games in their classrooms. Anyone use games or play games in their own learning? Take a moment, just place it in the chat. We'll hear from you. Those games, like the game that we hear most frequently in the United States is everyone of a certain age played this game called Oregon Trail. And you started out in the eastern part of the United States, and it was about making the way westward. Very common game. Any other games that people played? Not seeing any at the moment. Feel free to share. Teachers would often use Jeopardy type games as exam prep. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Common one. So these kinds of games are distinguished from gamification. And Holmes and Gee, in their review of the literature on games, really distinguish different types of games. They called the action frame, which is really game-based learning, as those that invite students to live the experience and really dive into the content of a situation. So Sid Meier's Civilization series has players consider governmental systems of the lands that they are strategizing to include in their empire. Similarly, a game can be used to illustrate or demonstrate a principle or an idea that is part of the content. So for example, some people may use Tomb Raider as a way to look at gender representation in a game. Gamification is when we use elements like founding games in non-game settings. So Family Feud or Kahoot, this would be where we gamify a content. So we might use leaderboards. You can think about how in Harry Potter, where they talked about, is Hufflepuff ahead of Ravenclaw in terms of points? We use points as another means to generate some level of competition so that people want to move up in their leaderboards. We have achievements like recognizing a badge or something that you have achieved, a new type of knowledge base. And finally, people talk about leveling up in games. And you see this where maybe you've only ever made it to level 2 in Angry Birds, and you just keep playing and keep playing and keep playing because you have the vision of someday making it to level 3. So we have a variety of types of games and then gamified elements that we use in other settings. And here's the question that everyone wants to know: does it work? Does it matter if we sort of change and shift up and shape our educational delivery format into a way that resonates with students? So I'll just share with you how large the gaming world is. 3 out of 4 of your students either play themselves or watch people play games. 3 out of 4. So think about our delivery modalities around content in the curriculum in higher education. And that content could be in a classroom, like in a government classroom. Sid Meier's Civilization might be perfect. Or it could be in an orientation where we typically maybe and our big excitement is by having a panel of students to share. Think about if we were to reach students using the modality that 3 out of 4 of them already are using. Does it work? Okay, so some of you are numbers people and others not so much. I'm just going to give you the high-level overview of this table. In a nutshell, yeah, it works like a dream. What we have across that top row are studies of studies. So these are research articles that didn't just look at a single study, but they looked at multiple studies and then synthesized the findings. And what we're looking at here are effects where it says G, D, or B that are not trivial. These are medium to, in social science research, moving into the larger effect sizes. And so when we think about like what's going to move the needle in terms of students' uptake and understanding our content, caring about it, acting upon it, changing behavior, just talking to them is probably not the way. Engaging them, which is what games do, uses in some cases physical activity. I love using physical activity to teach concepts like going for a hike, doing human anatomy. Some of you might even remember the board game from the 80s called Operation, where you had to practice, how you were going to do something. So does it work? The answer is yes. Here's the question: why does it work? Well, games, like anything, it's not a one and done. It's not simply enough to play a game. You actually have to play it often enough such that you can use what learning theory is about. We play, we may lose, you learn from that experience playing, and then you use that learning to change and modify your strategy so that the next time you play, you do better, you level up, you might just win. So duration, playing more than once, is really important in terms of having games be useful in changing knowledge and behavior. The other thing is that we can't just leave games to be fun and games. They're fun and informational. That's where supported instruction comes into play. We in higher education like to call ourselves facilitators or debriefers. In the gaming world, just embrace it. You're the game master. You're the ones who understand sort of the hidden curriculum and the scaffolding under the game. You're the ones that can bring the learning to light. So as my nephew always says, Aunt Trish, the game has to be fun first. Fun first. You can hide the learning afterwards. It can be then fun and informational. Some of the theory behind why games actually have such positive effects really come back to self-determination theory, sociocultural theory, and flow theory. And I would imagine that people on the call today all use these theoretical bases for the work that you do with students. So why self-determination theory? Well, it's harbored around autonomy. So students playing a game get to make choices. They get to develop their confidence by setting goals and then receiving feedback on how they're doing. And then there's that connection to others, the relatedness piece, which ties so perfectly in with Vygotsky, right? Vygotsky talks about the need to learn in community, and games give us that opportunity to do just that. And finally, when we find that state of flow, when the game just continues, and maybe you're into the third hour of Monopoly and you haven't even noticed, that's when you've hit that flow state. When students are having fun, they find flow. Games are a way to teach and to learn in that fun flow state. And there's a whole host of games that have been developed for exactly our purposes around helping students to be successful in post-secondary education. And I first started getting excited about games from some of the work done at the University of Southern California in the Game Innovation Lab. The future-bound games really talk about developing aspirations, and that's on the far left-hand side. These are for middle school students. It's a game that emphasizes goal setting and career aspirations, so it's at that widening participation or post-secondary access space. And then as those students get a little older, then they're starting to play Application Crunch, which was a card game to help navigate that post-secondary application process. What I learned in visiting with colleagues from USC was that game development can be a little tricky, especially at the digital level, if you haven't already worked out sort of the planning, the ideas, and the game mechanics. And so starting with a less difficult kind of strategy, whether it be board games or card games, gives you a chance to work out the ideas that you can then code into a digital game, which is what they did with Admission. And then finally, the last of their group was really about that search and making financial decisions. And Graduate Strike Force is a digital game that you can download and play. So I'm just going to take a moment and see, are anyone using games right now in your onboarding, orientation, first year experience programs? If anyone's using games currently or gamification, please add it to the chat. I want to share with you a couple additional games that have been developed in this space. A colleague of mine at Ferris State, Andrew Peterson, has developed a board game to help in that transition space, and it's called Enrolled, and it's available on the Game Crafter. We've also heard about higher education orientation, where the universal student sort of takes that notion of a scavenger hunt that we often hear about and moves it into an online platform. There's a fictional narrative in the universal student that an alien has newly arrived at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Australia and is trying to blend in and requires your help to complete tasks. And so you're collaborating together to solve all sorts of problems. Learn, ask questions, find books in the library, all that sort of thing. Riante from University of Guelph talks about gamification within orientation modules, earning badges and points, getting prizes. That would be very similar to the universal student. Lots of scavenger hunts for locating different areas of the Institute. On large campuses, scavenger hunts are such a great way to get people out, moving, learn about places on campus, whether they're getting stamps in a passport or collecting signatures. It's a great way to encourage that. Scavenger hunts for wellness and orientations, encouraging students to participate in wellness activities from Douglas College, absolutely. That is very similar to the Just Press Play, which essentially at Rochester Institute of Technology gamified the entire higher education journey. So while it starts in the first year, they continued with gamifying up through the fourth year and moving into using career services fully, interviewing, work integrated learning. And I'll just share with you that it's not just about a single class working through this, but at RIT in this Just Press Play, they actually invited their upperclassmen to help out, because what they found is that they levied a challenge to the first year students. And they said, if 85% pass this very difficult introduction to coding class, this will be the reward. And so those first year students went to their second and third year peers and said, can you help us with this challenge? This is peer learning at its finest. And those students well exceeded that threshold of 85%. So you can really see how that gamification, the challenge, the quest, the opportunity to then bring other people into that challenge makes a difference. I recently spoke with someone from SparkPath in Ottawa, Ontario, who developed a card deck that challenges students to really explore and reflect on majors and careers, and that's at SparkPath. How many of you are using escape rooms? Escape rooms, I think, are like the new version of the challenge and the scavenger hunt. You know, you get different clues and they unlock a new clue based on whatever you've figured out. Escape rooms can be powerful ways to get students excited around learning new locations. And the library escape room is a great example, not only to engage with library as the media that you know about, but also the non-traditional lending opportunities. So if you have VR and AR, maker spaces, an escape room using your library as a powerful way to get students excited. And then I want to just also share about developing empathy within our faculty and with our staff, who not all of whom have such a deep memory of what it was like to be a student. And so the Finish Line game, developed by the Achieving the Dream group, really invites administrators and faculty members to walk a day in the shoes of their students from different backgrounds and different demographic groups to understand the challenges they may face and the support that will make a difference in their being successful in higher education. I just want to take a moment and share, I'm seeing some folks saying, yes, we've been using escape rooms for 5 years. Folks who have used SparkPath challenge cards for careers. Breakout EDU for virtual escape rooms. Yes, absolutely. Breakout EDU is a fabulous resource. I would also want to share about Search and Destroy, which is on the Game Crafter. Search and Destroy helps students figure out how to use the right grouping of words in their searches for literature reviews. A fabulous and important skill that students need, to do well. Just going to take a moment though, also to share with you, trying to find my chat. I just lost it. It'll be right back. One moment. My own experience as a game developer. So before you begin in any sort of game development, you have to talk to the people who the game is for. And so for us, we played a version of Jeopardy, traveling around the very large state of Montana, asking high school students, what are the questions and concerns that you have about making the transition to post-secondary education? And my guess is you're gonna recognize some of them. While you might not have ROTC on your campus, you can probably recognize how do you reduce student loan debt? What are the cost differences between taking a virtual, a fully remote online experience versus face-to-face? This may be a moot point in our current world. Who's to say what that future might hold? You can see students are concerned about their mental health. What happens, how do you get insurance if you're in college, especially if you are no longer on your parents' insurance? Lots of questions about declaring a major and what is a major and how do you decide on a major? How do you find a job after college? Students are worried about how they get involved. How do I apply to get into clubs or extracurricular activities? And how do I not get lost? This is a question that is both physical, because some campuses, like when I taught at the University of Toronto, are huge, but also sort of just personal. Like, how do I feel like I have place on this campus? And so having listened closely to students who we were developing this game, we took it to the next level. And I learned with these students. These students in the bottom right-hand corner here, Brian Faustini and Waylon Roberts, are student game developers. And I went with them with this idea saying, I really want to help high school students make the transition to post-secondary education. I have the content. I know what the ideas are. I just don't know how to make it cool. And they said, oh, we can help you with that. We've been designing games since we were in grade 7. And so what you see here on the left-hand side and across the top are those initial prototypes of cards of how we started to develop this game. And I share this because games don't just happen overnight. Like any good program in any service that you have on your campus, it's an iterative process. You keep changing things up. You learn from your players. You listen carefully to them. You start to make some changes based on the feedback you're receiving. You play, you learn, you iterate, you play, and you hope to perfect. And this is another iteration. This is with, you can see Bran in the corner back there taking notes. We're observing the game in play. And so I share this because not all of you are game developers. In fact, very few of you might be, but there are principles around game development that I think can extrapolate to all of our work supporting students. And it's listening with them, learning from them, and then iterating, testing out. This is the continuous improvement cycle at its finest. These are students strategizing around another early in the next version of the game. And you can see they're engaged. They're having a good time. They're trying to figure out what the best way is to win. And what I have loved about games and have found the most interesting is that students who sometimes, when I walk into a classroom, whether it's in a university first-year seminar or in a high school classroom, sometimes an instructor will take me aside and say, you know, that group over there, they're kind of tough to engage. What I have found with games is that students who are often the more difficult to engage are the ones that buy in fully. They are in the strategy. They want to win. Something about competition sort of switches on. And so what I've been sharing with you over the last several photos is the iterative process by which we develop Success Print's Crash Course. And you might be wondering about the name Crash Course. It comes from students. As we were pilot testing all over Montana, I asked students, what would you call this game? We don't have a name for it. And it was from them. They said, well, it's like a crash course in how to do college. So that seems like the right name. And you might say, well, how do you play? So what we came up with as we were working through this is that students' biggest concern and worry, what I heard from students as we were in that needs assessment phase, when we were asking the initial questions, playing Jeopardy, students were worried about their major for sure. They were worried about how they were going to live without their mom. They were really concerned about how they were going to manage their time across so many competing demands. And so that's why you can see there in my hand in the middle are those blocks. Those are blocks of time, and they're the major mechanic by which you play the game. Students have to choose how they're going to use in any given week 12 blocks of time. And we tell them straight away, you don't really have 12 blocks of time to use, because just like in real life, if you use up all your time, meaning you don't sleep, how are you going to feel at the end of the week? You're going to be tired, you're going to be stressed. And so you have really 8 blocks of time to use with the goal of maximizing your GPA score and your social score. How do you do that? By making good choices around going to class, working, because you're going to need to have cash to pay tuition, and taking advantage of campus resources. So from the Supporting Student Success Research Project that I did across Canada for about 10 years, I've learned how frequently students don't know about the amazing programs and services that you offer. This game gives them a way to learn about those resources and choose to spend their time there. So real quick, I want to tell you a story about academic advising. The first time I played with a group of students, no one went to the academic advisor resource when it came up on the board. They didn't know what an academic advisor was, because in high school, that same exact person is called a counselor. So in post-secondary education, we make these assumptions that students will learn our lexicon just, I don't know, through the air. The game is another means by which to teach about our resources. So when I went back to that same high school a couple months later and we played the game again, and the academic advisor card came on the board, everyone went. Everyone spent their time there. And so I had to ask, well, I'm noticing that everyone is going to the academic advisor. Why is that? And they said, it's because now we know what it is. And those people help you make good choices of your classes. We have had great fortune of being able to play this game internationally, across the globe, here in Montana, in London, in Johannesburg, South Africa, and in a rural community in Southern Australia. And what have we heard from those who've played? It's that they appreciate, students appreciate having a chance to hear about post-secondary education, not in the sanitized version. This is my colleague, Kirsty Wadsley, formerly at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Students love that it is uncomfortably realistic because it teaches students a chance to play, practice, fail, and learn. Investing more time in studying really does make a difference. Choosing your friends, smart, to help you reach your goal. This is at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa. And it's a creative way to start to learn about common scenarios. So games are a powerful way for us to understand and to share without being sort of the wah, 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 which we often have heard. It costs a lot to gain high marks. Sacrifices have to be made. This is an important thing for students to learn. How are you going to balance all of what's going on at university? For all the challenges that you will face in a fun and innovative way. I want to just take a moment and see if there are any questions at this point. Feel free to just put them in the chat if you have a question. And then I'm going to go into some of the takeaways I have as both a game designer, but also as an educator. Feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll share with you some of my takeaways. These are areas that I think are not just about game design. This is not just about game development. When we listen to students, when we really listen and we hear what they have to say, it is the absolutely essential way that we move our practice forward to respond to their needs, to have them be part of those challenging conversations. But listening is just the beginning. We have to be open to take in what we have listened to, what we have heard, and to learn from it. How are you learning from your students? What are they sharing with you as they move forward? And when we have listened and learned, then I think we really have an opportunity to lead with them. And this is really hitting me home right now in our current moment. Some of you probably may be going back to face-to-face or some amount of blended learning where students are going to be on campus. In 10 days, they will be here on the campus in this building where I sit right now. We have to lead with them in this moment as we move through uncertain public health guidelines that seem to change throughout and almost at a moment's notice. How are we doing that? How are we leading together to that future? I want to just close by saying it takes a village to do this kind of work. Whether it's game development or changing things up on your campus, developing a new program, launching a new service, hiring for a new position. It doesn't happen overnight. Elizabeth asks, what was your timeline from start to finish? From start to finish. So we began the really tacit conversations with the game developers in January of 2018. We prototyped throughout January 18, and in March of 2019, I presented with my colleague Kirsty from London at South by Southwest EDU in Austin, Texas, the near finished version of the board. We launched the product, SuccessPrints Crash Course, for availability to homes, households, high schools, higher education institutions in October of 2020. So I would say it took a full year to get a solid working prototype. And then there was a lot of work around how do you get this manufactured if you want to get it manufactured. If you really just want to print something, you can get high quality printing done at virtually any printer in your town. What other stakeholders were needed to help this game come to life? I want to give up to really my dean at the College of Education, Health and Human Development, who I said, I have this idea. I need some funds to prototype this game. And I got a small grant for $5,000, and that's what brought Game Idea to life. Another question, are you making it digital? Absolutely. We had a plan of making it digital well before COVID. That situation, the current pandemic, has placed us into overdrive, and I'm meeting on a regular basis with the same team of game designers and others to launch what we believe will be an online game opportunity this fall. So Patty Hambler asked the same thing. Are you engaging virtually? We're working on not only making a version of Crash Course virtual, but also we're working on a college simulation that is a partner to that. We use social media as a way to engage folks from around the world and to share ideas and insights about that transition to post-secondary education. And we invite you to to follow us and to learn more. I'm curious if there are what other questions might be, or some conversation, because I have some prompts for you. Can we have people unmute? I'm curious if we go back to these takeaways, how are folks from this group listening, learning, and leading with students in our unique moment in time? Anyone care to share? Or other questions? As an educator, I'm really good with long pauses to see if anyone has a question or a comment they want to share. If you do, please feel free to just type something in the chat or to say, please unmute me. I'm going to quickly go to Twitter and see if there was anything on the Twitter feed, Caucus 20. Did you use a pre-existing game design model when designing it? Oh, that's a great question. No, honestly, we're all players of games, Bran and Wayland for sure, and there are those awesome places where you can test out and try lots of games in many communities. And so I think we all had some idea of what needed to be there, but it derived out of the objective, right? So we used the past research that I had done with the students' questions. I actually shared the 400 plus questions that we gathered from that Jeopardy game and those questions that I showed on the slide with the game designers. And I said, these are the questions that high school students have right now. We need to address those questions in a fun way. Clearly, they're worried about managing their time. They're worried about having enough money to pay tuition, and they're worried about majors. And so we wanted to be sure to include several of those different components within the game. And so we used a variety of different ways. So one of the ways to teach about social events on campus, there is a spot, the game plays in 9 weeks, and every week, which is a shortened semester, there are different things that go on. And so 1 week you might have an event where you may choose to spend extra time so that you make a friend. And then we wanted to know what are the pros and cons, the superpowers and the relationship upkeep for different friends. And so we wanted to introduce that component of social life and crafting a friend network, and the reality that friends come with relationship maintenance, right? Sometimes your friend is stressful. As you can see here with Ron, he counts as one stress. When I've played with students, I'm like, like friends who are stressful, do you have any of them? And when students shake their head, I always say, it's probably because you're that stressful friend. So we use this as a way to talk about social networks. We also felt like having assignments that were based off of large meta majors would help students to understand the different kinds of things that go into a major choice and selection. So for example, if you were thinking, and lots of students at the campus that I am now want to be engineers, but they don't really know what it means to be an engineer. So these assignments like write a program where a rudimentary AI can successfully navigate a maze of hazards is a pretty common engineering type assignment. If that sounds horrible to you, maybe that's not the best major. And we also wanted to introduce the fact that life happens. And sometimes you might think that you're getting really great shared notes from a friend and they end up being crummy. But sometimes somebody might take you out to dinner. So we tried to really capture the widest variety of what the college environment has to holds in store. The other thing that's exciting about the online game development is it provides even more space to tell richer stories and more nuanced narratives that you just are not able to in a physical board game. Are there other questions? Well, seeing none, I think I might turn it over. We might be ending a little bit early, and that's completely fine. I'm happy to hang out if there are some other questions that people want to ask, but I'll turn it over to our caucus representative to close us out.
Thank you so much, Tricia. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. I have embedded the evaluation in the chat box. If everyone could take a moment to fill that out, that would be fantastic. Just a few questions, some helpful feedback, and we're sure to pass that along to Tricia. Of course, if you are tweeting, sharing anything about today's session, please use the hashtag Caucus Online as well. You have all of Tricia's contact information on the final slide, and we're so thankful to all of you for joining us. And we will also share the recording within the end of the day as well. So thank you to everyone. Thank you, Tricia, for leading today's conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, just as we're closing up, a number of people have shared where is this, or wondered where is this university and what campus resources are included. It's set at the mythical Tabletop University, but we have been working with university clients to create customized versions for specific campuses as well. And so I think there's something to be said around, as you're doing game development, to really think through, how are you making this, whether it's a program or a service, how do you customize it? How do you contextualize what was the great idea you heard at a conference and make it your own in your own place for your students? And I think that's a real opportunity that we have when we do really custom design. Yeah, there's some questions in the chat. Do I know of other great initiatives that we should keep our eye on? I think that you can see the beginnings of this, where students this past spring used Minecraft to create sort of their own virtual universities and have people come as a means to have avatars graduate and to have sort of a virtual space to do that. I've seen similar kinds of building your own university through Animal Crossing. And so instead of your island, you can cultivate other kinds of things. I think that AR and VR, so augmented reality and virtual reality, holds a lot of possibility. I think that the challenge to some extent is really in moving from tactile, so lower cost modalities, board games, game cards, things of that nature. Like, you can print a board game custom for, say, $70. That's going to be a fraction of the cost of paying a coder to develop the code and the artwork and all of those pieces around those more technologically rich and difficult to code kinds of opportunities. Are there any other questions? These are great. Thank you so much for coming and being a part of this dialogue. As you can tell, I'm pretty excited for the possibilities that games have for helping us to transition students into and then be successful in higher education.
That's great. And it looks like we'll wrap up a little early today. So we'll stop the recording now and share this with everyone today.